It is within these halls that you will find your friends, your Pokemon, and your true self. We, the faculty and staff at Uva Academy, can't wait to welcome you with open arms.
Oh, guys, what are you doing?
Damn it, Jack, we had a meeting about this. You had one job.
It's hard to imagine that Pokemon's in its 9th generation, isn't it? In about 3 years' time, Pokemon will be 30 years old. It's funny when you think about it. Video games as a whole really aren't that old in comparison to their immediate contemporaries. Films debuted in 1888, full animation in 1908, and of course there are other video game franchises that are older than Pokemon. Take for example Mega Man, who coincidentally celebrated his 35th year as a franchise this year. Relatively speaking, Pokemon as a franchise is still rather young. Successful, mind you, but still young. I bring this up as, to me, it seems as though Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are great steps for this franchise, but unfortunately with how they're done, said steps are followed up with a slip off a cliff.
What the? Oh.
Hi, I'm Manga Common, longtime Pokemon fan, longtime YouTuber, and recently a connoisseur of fine alcoholic beverages that will be turned to coffee because that's how the world is nowadays, baby! This video will be going over everything that I can about the game. This includes story, characters, battles, and such. So you gotta worry about spoilers. This video is for people who have either played the game or seen these games, or don't care about spoilers. Yes, spoilers for a Pokemon game, which is actually appropriate considering that there's something more of an attempt of making a story for the characters in it. But what will be the first thing that we...
Focusing.
No, not that. Not yet, anyway.
This, my friends, is Pokemon Scarlet and Violet.
Chilling out with the crew in the schoolyard, finding trouble, never looking too hard.
If the opening theme song didn't give it away, it's time to go back to school, my friends. Yes, this time around, Pokemon is actually tackling the concept of going to a school to learn how to be a Pokemon trainer. Obviously, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic, but that's the bare bones of what these games are. Now, Pokemon schools have always been a staple in the Pokemon games, aka the trainer schools to be more precise, and have a game to actually be centered around that isn't the worst thing. I've been a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX for years at this point, and while I have my issues with the English dub,
That's right, Poopy!
My mother's very proud.
I like the concept of a school specifically made for a major aspect of the world, and it's one I do actually like. Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Are essentially my childhood in a nutshell, so obviously if I like Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, I'm probably going to like the premise for Scarlet and Violet. We're in the Paldea region, and we're new to the region, and it's our first day at school. Of course, when you boot up the game for the first time or start a new game, you're now tasked to make a new character, and this time, you are no longer to choose your gender. Hooray! We're taking the Animal Crossing route and going with styles. I know that I sound like a snarky ass right there, but this is a good idea for those who don't feel right, sticking with a binary choice of are you a boy or are you a girl? I mean, it took till the 2nd generation for Professor Oak to finally ask me that, so I guess about 20 years later we're finally free from the gender binary. Well, I say that, but throughout the games you're still referred to with a male and female pronouns, so it kind of feels a bit hollow. But that's to be expected with programming, I suppose. Not that this affects my enjoyment of the game, or as a criticism, but it's just something that I felt needed to be brought up because I found it odd. Even odder is that while there are a lot more options for the trainer customization when it comes to your beautiful mug and accessories, there's no option to change your actual outfit outside your seasonal uniform. Now, this is where I get to my first major criticism of the game, a lack of actual customization of your character. Now, I understand we're dealing with a school uniform situation, and that's all fine and dandy, but as I've said on this channel countless times,
Just because there's a reason doesn't mean I have to like it.
especially if you consider the last few generations of Pokemon had a lot more customization options when it comes to clothing for your character, and there would have been a really good solution for this. You could have included with the team faction of this game, Team Star. If you look towards the leaders of Team Star, I think it's easy to see they're decked out in uniforms that have been highly modified. Perhaps if you manage to defeat them, you could unlock more options for your uniform attire. Not just even specific outfits either, there's a lot you can do with a school uniform, like rolling up the sleeves, wearing your uniform shirt over a shirt you like, or maybe even ripping your pants. Uniform modification could have been good compromise here. Hell, if Yu-Gi-Oh! GX could do it with some of the students' uniforms, why not here? My point is, there's a lot more they could have done with the character customization, and it sucks that the only things you can really change are your accessories. And it feels like it's a step forward with the freedom of hairstyles for either style of character, but it's 2 steps back with the customization of your clothes. After we select how we look, we're treated with a cutscene of the game, a usual tradition of the games where the professor would give a brief explanation of the premise of the game and welcome you to it. Only this time we're greeted with Clavel, the headmaster of the Pokemon schools. To be fair, this isn't the first time we're greeted with a non-professor character. That was from Sword and Shield. Of course, if you've seen the opening, you're met with an, interesting greeting from the faculty and students.
Ah! I saw it again! I saw them T-posing again!
Please stop asserting your dominance on me. I'm getting pretty uncomfortable here. Now, aside from the obvious, there's another issue that we come across. The lack of voice acting. This was an issue I brought up with both Sword and Shield and Legend Arceus, which, frankly, as much as I hate the phrase of highest grossing franchise, Pokemon really needs to start investing in voice actors for the 3D Pokemon games. Other games on the Switch have voice acting in them, and frankly it really detracts from the scenes that have a bit more impact. Like, not to get into story spoilers too early into the video, so let's go with a fan voice acted scene for when you're choosing the starters.
Are you these three's trainer?
Not quite.
Huh?
They have yet to make their choice, you see. I do wonder which of them they will choose as their first Pokemon.
Now, I'm not saying every single scene needs to be voice acted, just the major cutscenes, especially when Game Freak went to the trouble of animating the lip flaps of the characters to talk during these scenes. It just seems like a very odd choice to focus on if you're not even going to have voices with it. And it's not like there are ways around voicing every language. They could do something akin to like the Klonoa series where there's a fake language, or they could just take the Yakuza route and just dub the game in Japanese.
Would you tell me how to get to the station?
Oh shit, it's English.
They already have an English subtitle, and for those who aren't Japanese speakers, it would still fill up the quiet time that we got going on here. I guess my point is, voice it already, damn it! I understand that voice acting can be expensive, but I want to hear the rapping granny gym leader actually rapping. I think I've made my point!
Don't wanna fall in love, I just wanna get.
After we're introduced to the 3 starters and go on a walk with them, we're introduced to our first main character. This, my friends, is Nemona, a battle-crazed rival who's a little bit too battle-crazy, and she seems to be obsessed with it. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you're familiar on my channel, I've complained about rivals, and Pokemon rivals specifically, and I tend to have a bit of a standard when it comes to their personality and battle ability. As it turns out, Nemona is a champion-level trainer!
Okay.
Personality-wise, I don't really have an issue with her. She's not as annoying as Hao, nor does she really hold your hand throughout the game, and she doesn't come off as a jerk. Obviously. Granted, that could be because of how the game is set up with its 3 story branches, but we'll get to that later. Nemona, as a handicap, takes the starter that is weaker to yours, since her regular team would supposedly wipe the floor with you with their sheer level, which, considering that's based solely on level, yeah, that kinda tracks. That being said, I never had an issue with Nemona throughout the story, and we never actually see her original team, which, if you ask me, is a little bit of a letdown. The next major character we're introduced is... Is that? Depending on which version you're playing, you'll be introduced to Koreadon or Miradon. These will be your ride Pokemon throughout the game, and with more abilities unlocked via sandwiches. Maybe I could give it something, but my sandwich! No! I have to give up my sandwich. Can I give you Lechonk? We're then introduced to... You can shove off. Okay. Arven! He's the son of the professor of the region, which again is dependent on the version you're playing. You either get the Chad Professor Turo or the hot damn Professor Sada. Arven is a jerk. That's all I can really say for now. The final major character you meet is when you get to the academy at Mesagoza is Penny, a shy girl with a floofy Eevee backpack who's getting harassed by Team Star members. She's cute. Now, the reason I go through all this is to establish that these 3 represent the 3 paths that you can take in Scarlet and Violet. This is essentially something that I greatly approve of for the Pokemon series, especially since Scarlet and Violet are essentially open world games. With the exception of Mesagoza, most of the towns you can visit are a part of the world, and you can continuously move through them. Funnily enough, this is probably one of the fastest openers to a mainline Pokemon game that follows the quote-unquote formula. You spend a little time in the intro, you get your starter, have a small tutorial, and then you can start your catching spree. Now, I'm going to try to limit my comparison to Breath of the Wild as much as I can in this video because I've literally gotten sick of everyone and their uncle making that comparison to Slam Pokemon, but once you're done with the opening, you're allowed to go wherever you want. Sure, you're barred from some areas due to the lack of mobility, but it isn't to say you can't explore the surprisingly large area. Seriously, the first route in most Pokemon games is rather empty and boring, but in Scarlet and Violet they've opened up and you don't need to worry about random encounters since all the Pokemon are visible on the screen. The pacing of the opening is really fluid. You can honestly just power on through it quickly and you're only required to battle a couple of times.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck?
And during the in-between of those battles, you're allowed to get your feet wet, you can get Pokemon, and can find a number of goodies. There's also a good selection that you can grab before you get to the first town. You can get a pretty good varied team before you reach Mesagoza, and after you're done with the introduction, the world is opened up to you. You know, when you really think about it, Pokemon has always had a bit of a three-story structure within the games. You have the gym challenge, you have the story involving the antagonist team, and you have sometimes the personal story with your rival character. The big difference between the past iterations of this formula and the ones Scarlet and Violet is that you can challenge the three storylines in any order that you want to interchange them. In a sense, this is a non-linear Pokemon game. We've had a taste of this way back in Generations 1 and 2 where you could challenge a few of the gyms at different orders, but it was kinda messy. In Scarlet and Violet, however, you can take on any of three storylines at your own pace. I should note that there is an issue with this though, but I want to talk about the positives before I go on full-on madness here. The positives here are obviously that you can tackle the stories at your own rate and however you want, not to mention you're essentially getting 18 badges this time because every battle has a different type to it. These battles include the Victory Road Path, where you have the bog standard gym challenge, the Path of Legends, where you're fighting against Titan Pokemon to gather mystical herbs from them, and Starfall Street, where you face off against Team Star. Each of these paths gives you a reward and expand what you can do. For each gym badge you acquire, you gain the ability to catch and tame higher leveled Pokemon. For every Titan Pokemon you defeat, more movement abilities for your box legendary will be unlocked. And for every Team Star badge you acquire, you gain more technical machines that you can craft at Pokemon Centers. If we're being honest here, the best path for me from a utility standpoint is the Path of Legends, where you can gain more movement for your box legendary and allow you to travel the land of Paldea easier, some of which is necessary since you need the climbing ability to get to certain areas. Really, it reminds me of the riding Pokemon that were in Legend Arceus. The only difference is that you have a more compact asset tool that you can use to run around and you don't need to constantly change your riding Pokemon in the process. It's a less tedious method of traveling in Arceus, and considering you don't have to worry about things like stamina or the fucking rain, once you gain every ability that your legendary has, you'll be able to go wherever you want to. I think this is also a good time to talk about the story for each journey since they all revolve with the characters of the story. Well, save for the Victory Road one, there's nothing really interesting to talk about in Nemona's story since she doesn't really have a development of a character. You get to meet the gym leaders and they have their own entertainment value, like take for example Larry. Larry's the best character in this path. Hands down. The guy just oozes with normalcy. In fact, a lot of the gym leaders have a very distinct personality and design to them. Like, there's the VTuber in the making, Iono, Gusha the snowboarder.
I have special eyes.
Larry is God, the rapping Grandma Rhyme, and Kofu, who seems to be rocking two monobrows. What the hell is up with his design? But really, if we're talking about the writing, the other two paths have a lot stronger in that. Arvin's story is a lot more character-focused as we learn about his past and how, because of his careless actions, the one friend he had, Amabostiff, got hurt in the crater of Paldea. It helps that Arvin helps throughout the battles against the Titan Pokemon, and we do see that of the neglect that he had from his parents disappearing, he became rather distant from people. It's a pretty simple story, but it works well for Arvin's character, and what can I say? I like seeing jerks showing off the more caring sides and eventually opening up to you. Helps that Arvin has the best line in the entire game, too. You really ruined my old childhood, you know?
I missed the part where that's my problem.
But if you really want my opinion on what the best storyline in the game is, it's the one with Team Star. Not only do we get insight for all the squad bosses, learning more about them as characters, but we also get insight as to why they formed Team Star in the first place. Honestly, Team Star is probably my second favorite team in Pokemon now, only second to Team Skull, because Team Star isn't actually a group of evildoers or mafiosos. They're just a bunch of well-meaning kids who were sick of being bullied by their classmates, formed a group and were prepared to fight back against the bullies who made their school lives miserable. It also serves as a peek into how bullying can be overlooked in the school system. Honestly, if you follow the story and flashbacks for the characters, we learn that they never even lifted a finger against their bullies. They ran away before they could throw a single Pokeball. Unfortunately, bullies are complete cowards. And when the bullies ran, Team Star was painted as the abusers. The previous school board and leaders were cowards and were on the verge of expelling the squad bosses, but then their leader took all the blame. The squad bosses were unwilling to disband the team due to the friendships they made with the leader of Team Star, however. And unfortunately, due to the squad bosses being truant to their classes, they're on the verge of being expelled again. So, an individual named Cassiopeia recruits you to defeat the squad bosses and take their badges. Because according to Team Star's code, if they lose their badge, they essentially lose their right to be a leader in the team. Frankly speaking, I find this to be the most interesting story amongst the three storylines. It's fun with the changing gameplay, the bosses are pretty fresh compared to others in Pokemon, and the characterization of our squad bosses and their leader touched this cynical man's stony old heart.
Oh, and introduce Clive. Hi, Clive.
Gee, it seems like you're a bit too old for a student in this school. Then again, we've got middle-aged women, old farts, and people who make me a little uncomfortable that they're students, but hey, never too old for an education, right? Who could you be? Now here's where I give a spoiler warning for this story. If you don't want to hear this, then please go to the timecode on screen. I mean, it's kind of obvious if you play the game, but Pokemon fans got so butthurt about me drawing starter evolutions on a thumbnail to the point where they complained about a post honoring the late Jason David Frank. I'd rather not deal with those jackasses again. So Team Star's leader turns out to be Penny. As it turns out, she was bullied to the point where she became a recluse in her own dorm room and found others who were also bullied like her. She grew close to the squad bosses and decided that she cared for her friends so much that she'd take the blame for all the controversy that was happening. A year and a half later, Penny returns to the academy to find that her friends were about to be expelled for not going to class and decided to don a mask to have you defeat them to save them. The arc ends with you battling Penny and her friends secretly watching, with them understanding that she was caring for them during this whole time. It's nice, it's got a few plot holes, but nothing too major. Alright, so, we should be done with the major spoilers. Let's talk about the major flaw with this 3-story arc, and that's because there's no level scaling in the game. For those who aren't familiar with the level scaling concept, it's something in games that once you reach a certain level or a story beat, the game will make the enemies stronger to maintain a consistent level of challenge. This is usually for RPG games and is supposed to discourage grinding for the player, as the stronger you are, the stronger the enemies become. So when you don't have that in an open world like this, especially when you have a hard level system, you're gonna have issues. I say this because Pokemon unfortunately has made a right path for you to take on how you take on each of these 3 storylines. I won't be the first person to say this, hell, it won't be the first time I myself have said this, but level scaling should have been tied to the badges that you have. And it should have been a lot easier to do since you essentially have 18 badges. For every badge you can have the gym leaders, Team Star squad bosses, and the 5 Titans increase their levels by 5. Why 5, you may ask? Simple math, my friends. 5 times 18 equals 90, which can lead to a battle against the Pokemon League with extremely high-leveled Pokemon battles and the champion nearing level 100. Not only will this allow the players to take on the gyms, squad bosses, and titans at their own rate, but they'll also have a consistent challenge rating to them. Now, this is just my perspective on it because this is an opinion piece, but I want, in my humble opinion, if you're telling me that I can tackle these stories in any way I want, I kinda want to tackle them however I want. If it were up to me, I'd take on the Titans early so I can get my movement with the box energy optimal, and then I could travel wherever I wanted. But I can't do that because the level curve for these things are pretty big. That being said, I still maintain that this is a good thing for Pokemon. The 3 storylines should be something that future iterations of Pokemon should adopt and continue down that path. To me, this is the strongest writing that Pokemon has had since Generation 5, which is sad considering that this is Gen 9. This is probably going to be my most divisive part of the video for me because there's a lot of good and some disappointment. So let's get the positives first. The camera. Sword and Shield really do feel like a testing ground in comparison to the Scarlet and Violet when it comes to the camera. I never really had an issue with the camera, with the exception of it clipping to the ground a few times when I defeated a Pokemon in the wild. Not a big deal for me personally, but I have to be honest in these reviews. Battling in Pokemon is pretty much the same as it was in previous mainline games, and we now went back to the standard of catching Pokemon, where you have to battle them to catch them. I feel like a little bit was lost in the comparison to Legends Arceus, where you could sneak up and catch the Pokemon without battling, which, if I could put on my tinfoil fedora for a moment, feels like it was something that was going to be implemented because you have the ability to sneak in Scarlet and Violet. Then again, while I would like this, I'm not sure if I'd like to have this in the bog standard Pokemon games. I will say that there are other aspects to Pokemon's gameplay that I do enjoy. We finally have follow Pokemon again, and this time there's actually a purpose to it. But I need to kill all of you. Ah! If you allow your Pokemon to run with you, they'll battle against wild Pokemon on their own, meaning you can continue walking without having to stop to gain EXP from wild Pokemon. They'll pick up items they come across, and if you happen to come across the shiny Pokemon, the wild Pokemon will not be automatically defeated. That being said, I find the shiny Pokemon in this game being implemented to be a major step backwards, because unlike in this game, if you came across a shiny in Legends Arceus, you'd be granted with a sound effect and graphic before you actually engaged it. Not the same in Scarlet and Violet, which, when you have the Pokemon walking around and not be random chance, it is kind of necessary, especially when there's some of the shiny Pokemon that have details that make them very hard to catch because they're minuscule. Regardless of that, there are a ton of quality of life changes that I do appreciate. The first being that one-time use items are now recyclable, meaning that if you use them in battle, they appear once again once you leave said battle. so you don't need to grind to get that back for a one-time use item. Breeding can be done quickly and anywhere you want with the picnics. Selecting Pokeballs is easy and fast to use when you're catching Pokemon. Items in the overworld are easier to see when you grab an item, it's really quick to grab it. There's an auto heal button for your Pokemon, so you don't need to waste time going to your menu to do so. Pokemon actually has a good mini-map, and you can fly wherever you want with fast travel once you unlock specific areas, and you can even see Pokemon and set markers to help find you out. While customization is limited with clothing, you can customize wherever you want and don't need to be in a boutique to do so. You have access to nature mints to change your Pokemon's nature, ability capsules to change abilities, and once you unlock 6-star raids, you get the chance to acquire an item that can make your Pokemon's hidden ability be unlocked. While the EXP share cannot be turned off, it really didn't affect my gameplay when I went to try to play it. I actually had a little challenge in the game when I was just going by the pacing. Not to mention the distribution of EXP seems to be a bit more balanced to me in this time around. Now let's talk about the new gimmick of Pokemon, Terrestrial Pokemon. Most people will know this, but during battles you can have one of your Pokemon change its typing. Most Pokemon you catch outside of raids will mostly have its Terra type be one of its original types. However, if your Pokemon is a dual type and it's weak against one of your opponent's moves, you can then throw it for a loop by changing the typing. It's an interesting mechanic that we somewhat saw in Gen 6 when Mega Evolution would sometimes change the typing of Pokemon when you Mega Evolve. It is an interesting mechanic for sure, and one that I really do appreciate. The only issue is that I'm not a fan of the Pokemon wearing goofy hats. Like, you could have set a similar symbol or have the Pokemon crystallize and change color to convey that. It's not like we need the large fire chandelier or fountain on the Pokemon's heads, since when you go to select a move, it tells you what moves are strong or weak against the type of Pokemon you're facing. I do find it a bit more compelling than Dynamaxing, mainly because it changes the battle without having a time limit to use it. Not to mention, when you're doing the Terra Raid battles, if you manage to win, you can just catch the Pokemon. No worries on your catch escaping from the ball, like how the Dynamax Raid battles are operated. Even then, you can also change your Pokemon's Terra type once you get enough of those shards for the specific element that you want. Now, I've railed on the concept of skipping battles in the wild with other trainers, and I still maintain that I don't like it. Granted, this is an objective standard for me, it's just a personal preference, because I kinda like battling trainers and having to maneuver around them at times, and in a free roaming game like this, it's easy to avoid them. Granted, the game gives you a reason to challenge the trainers, as you can get rewards from your local Pokemon Center if you defeat a certain number of trainers in every area. It's totally optional, but it gives you some incentive to seek out battles, which is key to making open world games. The less hand-holding and forcing the players to do something, the better. Options and choices are the things you need to give your players when you're doing an open-world game. You don't want them to feel boxed in, and that's what Scarlet and Violet are. They're actual open-world games for Pokemon, something that the Pokemon fans have wanted for ages. That being said, like I said before in my critique of the 3 stories, there does seem to be a set path that you have to take. There is no level scaling, and unfortunately I don't really care for that. And even more unfortunate, Scarlet and Violet seem to have a very terrible first impression.
Hey, the tree looks a little better. It's not an N64 tree. Although, the branches jutting out are a little sus.
Yes, we're finally getting to the part of the video that I'm sure a lot of people were waiting for me to get to, the glitches. Now, what I'm about to say is that yes! This is important. A game coming out like this deserves criticism. It deserves to be lambasted, and for a product I'm paying $60 for, this kind of thing is unacceptable. That being said, in my own personal experience playing the game, I never fell out of the world. I was never exposed to the nightmare fuel. The worst I myself faced was, again, seeing beyond the ground. And my game only crashed once, and it's probably due to more on my end with the cooperative gameplay when playing online. Now, this isn't me dismissing the issues that people have had, I'm just explaining my own experience in the game. In addition, I've heard there have been a couple of people not experiencing these issues when they emulate the game. So I'm not above considering that the issues are also in part to the year-old hardware that is the Switch. Nintendo really does need to revamp the Switch to be a little bit stronger. What I'm saying is that Pokemon Nintendo kinda screwed up on this in different ways. Which is a shame because this is probably the best that Pokemon has ever looked. If it wasn't for the glitches, I think this would have been at the very least a pretty decent looking Pokemon game, especially for the 3D era. Yes, there are probably a ton of small issues such as textures and such, but here's where I'm gonna say my usual mantra. Graphics do not matter to me so long as I can play the game. And I had a lot of fun with the game, and my eyes aren't bleeding, so to me, I think that's fine. Besides, in comparison to Legends Arceus, I'd say this is a vast improvement, even more so when you consider that the Pokemon models have a lot more individual textures to them. Metallic Pokemon have a shine to them, scaled Pokemon have scales, and there's a lot more individual hairs on furry Pokemon. It's nice to look at, and it's a shame that the glitches are obviously overshadowing it. Last I checked, Metacritic has clocked the latest Pokemon games at a 2.9, with countless people giving the game a 0 out of 10. Now, I'm not that much of a prick to say that people don't experience these glitches. There's obvious footage of that online. Duh. However, I find most of these glitches to be funny and not so much affecting the game itself, to the point where I find a lot of people are just trying to make the games out to be much worse than they actually are. This to me is what I like to call the Cyberpunk 2077 effect, where the glitches of the game overshadow the actual pros and cons of it, and people are willing to overblow the glitches and use it to make fun of the game and bury the game into a negative scope.
Oh, David, my man, what's going on?
The difference is that 2077 recently got a fair shake because of the Edge Runners anime, and it helped the game get more patches to fix some of its issues over time. Again, I want to make it clear, I'm not for games like this being released to the public in these states. Do not get that wrong. I don't think the games are 0 level of quality, but these glitches should have been playtested, caught, and fixed before the games were released. I've defended Pokemon in the past, but I've never directly stated I'm for having the games come out in a 3-year timeline, or how Pokemon seems to want to release a title in such little time, almost every year now. To me, the issue comes from a more corporate side of things, since Pokemon has always released their titles around the middle of November so they could be early enough for Black Friday and be in time for the holidays to get the most money out of it. That's business. Now, this is a reason, not an excuse. I've never been a fan of corporate bullshit intervening with something that I enjoy, and even more so if said corporate meddling gives the Trogs an excuse to flash their 0 numbers on these games. And yes, I like these games. If it wasn't for the glitches, they would probably be tied for my favorite generation of Pokemon, right up there with Gen 5's first and second halves. I hope the developers make a much better patch so we can at the very least get a chance to enjoy the game as it's intended and not worry about the glitches, because there's a great game buried underneath this mess. There's a reason I chose the title A Botched Masterpiece, because, yeah, it is a botched masterpiece. If it wasn't for the glitches, I have no doubt in my mind that these games would be instantly loved. By everyone. Hell, even the usual folks who popped up to take advantage of the controversy of Sword and Shield would probably be silenced because of everyone liking the games. It would have been like Legends Arceus, an effect where people fell in love with the game because of the gameplay and the fresh take that it brought to the series. And Scarlet and Violet had that same spark that Arceus had. The only difference is that Legend was put together well enough not to break. So if you want my thoughts on whether you should get these games, that's a pretty difficult question for me to answer. If you're okay with funny glitches and waiting for get patches for the game that may or may not come, then I say get it. Even more so if you're a Pokemon fan looking to experience the first open world game in the official series, even more so than Legends Arceus. Otherwise, I would not suggest it. There's a reason why Nintendo is offering refunds at the time of me typing this out. I want to make it clear. I do not think these are bad games. What the games have underneath is good, really good, and something that Pokemon needs to continue using with, especially with the writing. Actually caring about their characters and the stories instead of just relying on the character design, experimenting with the gameplay and the quality of life additions. But unfortunately, the biggest issue I have is now how Game Freak, the Pokemon Company, and Nintendo themselves will take the wrong lesson from the issues from this mess. It happened before with Generation 5 into 6, and unfortunately I know that's going to keep happening. I would not be surprised that in Gen 10 we will probably come out in 2025 that will lose the open world and the roaming Pokemon and all the other effects except for the quality of life effects. Now, I have no idea if this is true, and I'm being slightly hyperbolic, but to be completely clear, I don't really trust Nintendo with the Pokemon franchise or the companies that control the games to really make the next generation all that better if they're willing to let these games out the door the way they were. Yet, despite all my negativity, I still can't bring myself to say that these are bad games. Yes, they need a lot of work with the glitches, but beyond those, I can see a bright path for the Pokemon games to take in the future. Still, what do you guys think? Do you think that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are worth the trouble? Or do you think I'm just blowing smoke? If you got this far into the video, please consider leaving a comment. Hell, leave a comment saying, "You ruined my childhood!" There's still a lot more to talk about these games, but I want to save my tongue for the possibility of DLC, and then talk about the game characters and stories in depth even more so. Until then, I'm Manga Common, and thanks for watching. Also, I misgendered my duck. I'm sorry!
Do we know exactly who we're going with?
Ah! Yay! He actually did it. He's on my arm, just like in the picture.
Wait, what? It's a female. What? It is? I got a female child. It's female? I didn't notice! I mean, I'm not complaining, but this happened to me again!